Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to YouTube Live on the IRA channel and also the Prophetic Mission Facebook page. Today we're going to be discussing no God and no good. Assalamu alaikum, Imran.
Walaikum Assalam. How's it going,
How are you
Subboor?
doing? How's the lockdown
Good.
treating you?
Yeah, good. Just getting used to it slowly. We're pretty much used to it now, but it's another 3 weeks for us in the UK. I don't know what the case is in Pakistan, but we're down for another 3 weeks. We're out for another 3 weeks.
Yeah. That's. I think we're on long. Allah knows best, but yeah, it's going to go on for a bit of time. So, what I wanted to talk to you about today was basically that right now we're going through this crisis. We're going through this crisis, which is really testing the limits of human compassion. Yeah. So, as an example, we're seeing amazing parts of the human nature where people are going out, sharing, caring, being selfless. And at the same time, we've seen some viciousness, we've seen some selfishness, we've seen some unorthodox type of behavior from people who are supposedly rational. So during this time, people ask the question, can you be good without God? Is God a something that you need to be good? So, what are your thoughts on this, current crisis and how the flavors of people are coming out at the moment?
Yeah, but I think this could be addressed in two levels. One level is just like the logical level, rational level. Okay, can you make sense of good and morality in the absence of God? And we could probably discuss that later, but let's touch upon it on a simple level first, bro, which is, we absolutely have been seeing some, like, especially in the beginning when the crisis first kicked in, there was a lot of the reaction was quite strange in some ways, but upsetting in some ways as well. I remember walking into my local supermarket, Tesco's, after like 2 days, 3 days, and the shelves were empty. People were just like loading up their trolleys. And I even saw, bro, at points where, there was someone with, and I assume they were Asian or Pakistani individual with a trolley full of like stuff, and they had like 6 of each thing. This was before they put the sort of ban on like 3 items per, or 3 of each item. You can't get any more than that. And they had a trolley full, and there was a old lady, and she was asking the guy, "Can you give me one?" Because the shelf was empty. And he looked at her, and he just, like, in a very cold way, just went like this. Yeah, and that was so heartbreaking, bro. That you got 7 of that item in your trolley. Give the lady 1. You're not going to use all 7, right? You're probably not going to use it till next year. So you will be starting to see this expression of human nature, which was quite, a quote unquote evil and selfish. It was a really nasty thing to see, and upsetting as well. That look at the way we can react when we're put in a certain situation. And I think this sort of ties into the point about being good without God. And I recently read a book. I was going through a book called The Lucifer Effect, and it's a very interesting book. Because this guy, have you gone through it?
No, but it's a very funny name.
It was a very interesting book because this psychologist that wrote the book, he was the one that conducted that experiment in America a few decades ago, where he got a bunch of university students, and they did this whole play or mock setup of a prison. So some of the students were supposed to be prisoners, and some were supposed to be the guards. And they all knew that it was a setup, right? It was all just an experiment. But literally within a couple of days, they started to live those roles and become those characters, right? And so much so that they had to just call it off eventually, because the guards started to treat the prisoners in some very nasty ways, although it was an experiment. So, and one of the things he highlights is very powerful, bro, and the concept, which was that human beings, what animates the human being is the power of situation, right? So the human being is a character on stage, and what brings that character to life is the power of a situation. So I was applying this to the coronavirus outbreak, that the situation was, okay, this global pandemic, this outbreak, right? Now that animated people in a certain way, right? Which was this sort of this very selfish, aggressive, quote unquote evil. And I'm careful when I say that expression, selfish, like, I want this is for me, forget everyone else. I don't care about anyone else, etc., etc. So I was thinking about this, and he now tries to provide solutions in his book, like, okay, we need to have that sort of the hero archetype, the hero character come forward, and to overcome this type of reactionary approach to any situation. But what I thought is, all of this is going to fail, bro. At the end of the day, unless the human being has a higher goal, a higher objective, a higher moral, they're going to be a slave of that situation in and of itself. Right. So that situation is gonna be the master of the way they react and way they come across and what they do. But if you have God, and if you know the reality of this life, and you know that God created you and He created you to be good, and being good is a part of worshiping God, then in any given situation, the situation is not going to dictate how you react per se. Obviously, you will react. Human beings have to react no matter what in every situation. You can't just sit there and not react. But the way you react is not going to be dictated by the situation. It's going to be dictated by your higher values, by God, right? So in this viral outbreak, if you're a believer in God, you have that higher goal, the higher objective. You're going to stop and think, I can react in a selfish way, but what does my belief in God dictate to me? How should I react, therefore? And therefore, you be like, I can be selfish, but no, I'm going to be selfless. I'm going to do what's actually good, what's virtuous. I'm going to help the people, take care of them. I'm not going to take 10 of one item. I'm going to take 2 of it, and I'm going to give the rest to these other people. Do you see? So absolutely, from a very practical perspective, the belief in God leads you to, or encourages you and gives you the motivation to be good and behave in a good way, I would say.
That's a very beautiful way of putting it, actually. Animation, the fact that...
While you share your thoughts, bro, while you share your thoughts, I'm going to get my charger and just plug it into my phone.
That's fine.
Give me one.
That's fine. So what Imran was basically saying there was he's been reading this book called Lucifer Effect. And by the way, for anybody who's joined us today, we're talking about no God, no good. In the dawah, we hear this all the time. We hear we're trying to call people to God, and they're like, we don't need God to be good. We can be good without God, right? Having God in our lives is irrelevant. However, like Imran pointed out, using that book and also other studies and other things which have been done, and just even anecdotal human observation, is, well, if we have this idea that, we don't need God, we don't need any external idea of a standard or somebody to judge us, we could just be good without any of these things, right? We could be totally good without any of these things. Then why would we need, say, traffic lights? Why would we need police? Why would we need these types of things? I mean, this whole idea of we don't need the stick to be good. We can be good with the carrot. We can be good because of good in of itself. But this has limits. Like, for example, if you're doing good things because it makes you feel good, there's going to be times where you don't feel like giving, but you're going to give anyway. And Imran started off by giving the example of what happened in Southall, which is a very interesting part of London.
You're assuming it was Southall, by the way. It wasn't Southall. Just because I live there, it doesn't mean
it was London, somewhere in London, right?
Somewhere in London,
yeah. So anyway, of the person who refused to give to the old woman, and he had like 7 of each item. When we think of the Prophet ﷺ and the Prophet, peace be upon him, saying that, paraphrasing here, but do not hoard or Allah will hoard from you. Now that is a metaphysical reality we believe in, right? That if you are going to hoard in your physical, from an atheistic perspective, from a naturalistic perspective, it's here, I've got it, I've got my 7 jars, right? But Allah's messenger is telling you, no, Allah is going to take that from you. Allah is going to punish you. Allah is going to create a situation that your selfishness is going to backfire. So say, for example, that person who was hoarding, he was hoarding the 7 jars. It could be that later on he gets a parking ticket and he loses money. Right? So when the Prophet said, do not hoard or Allah will withhold from you, this is where we see the limits of atheism. This is where we see the limits of naturalism. Because technically, if you're a naturalist or an atheist, and someone tells you the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the Prophet of Islam, he said this, they'll be like, well, okay, but I don't really believe that. It doesn't have an impact. So you have to have belief. You can't just have this notion of, okay, we want to be good.
Absolutely, bro. There's no drive, bro, if you think about it. Look, people could be good when things are good, yeah? Because remember, as human beings, we're not saying that atheists can't be good. Of course they could be good, because it's in nature. God has created every human being with a nature. It's not going to be different for atheists now. there's good within them. There's good, a part of their soul, a part of their makeup, right? So they're gonna express good, right? When things are easy, human beings will tend towards, at least the ones that incline towards the good within them will tend towards doing good. But it's the real litmus test is when things get tough,
Yes,
and
and
things get hard.
so I want to
Yeah,
interject you here just briefly, because I want to make sure we get all the questions this time. This is exactly, your last point is exactly related to the question that we just had, so I want
yeah.
you to answer it. Salam, you think it's worth pointing out to people that the concept of good without God can work, but usually only for a couple of generations, or when basically the comfort runs out?
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, bro, goodness is a part of the human condition, nature, yeah. When things are easy, we and those that incline towards the good will act in a good way. Atheists act in a good way all the time, bro. Yeah, we probably know atheists that we can say are good people. But for one, there is no ought that presses down on people without God to act in a good way in every given situation, right? So when
Mhm.
things get tough, then that sort of, it's all about the self, my survival, what's good for me, forget everyone else, right? There's
Mhm.
no higher moral drive or ought that will get you to do good in any situation. So for example, as we saw, coronavirus outbreak, people were freaking out. The initial reaction was the selfish reaction, right? Which was,
Yep,
I'm going
yep,
to just do what's good for me, forget everyone else,
yep.
assuming what they thought was good for them, right? But if you have God and you are a believer in God, and with that, for example, you are a Muslim who submits to God and follows Islam, then you know that you are here to do good. That means being good in every given situation, no matter how tough it is, how difficult it is. So you have that higher goal, you have that ought that presses down on you to be good in any situation, right? And I think the questioner uh, has made a very good point that, yeah, you maybe be able to sort of hold on to some good for a certain period of time, but it's not gonna last. There's nothing that's binding you to be good. Do you see what I'm saying? Without God, it's just like, yeah, okay, it's up to me. Things are good. I can behave in a good way because I may feel good by doing good, right? So you may feel good by helping the old lady cross the road, right? But say if that situation was different, and when it came to, there were other factors in place, would you still behave in that way? So, and that's why you said we need laws. There's laws that govern certain things, right? Human beings without God. This is why, bro. Remember, I think you mentioned it. Who was that mentioned it? Was it Hamza? Someone mentioned it. Where even when Nietzsche said God is dead, yeah. I think it was Yusuf who pointed this out. When Nietzsche said God is dead, people, atheists, jump and say, "Oh, look, here is he's championing atheism, X, Y, Z." But if you look into, he was specifically speaking to the secularists who had already denied God, and he was trying to remind them that, look, you've killed God. You're still trying to hold on to these Christian values that can only be accounted for via God and anchored
Yep,
in God. In the
yep.
next coming generations, you're not going to be able to hold on to them, or you're not going to want to hold on to them because there's nothing grounding them anymore, right? So you're heading towards, like we said, nihilism, which is this: everything is meaningless. Morals are meaningless. Good and bad is meaningless. It's just whatever works, essentially, whatever
Mhm.
sort of is for the
Yeah.
self.
So I think that's a really beautiful way of putting it, that you made a distinction that, look, we're not saying atheists can't do good actions, but there's a limit to how much good you're going to do if you believe ultimately there is no accountability. Because human beings, we work by pain and pleasure, we work by carrot and stick. And this whole idea of, well, I'm going to be good for good's sake and I need nobody to tell me what to do, that's not actually true. Human beings, we actually need structures, we need a society, which is why there's an emphasis from societies in which people follow the laws of the land, and so those societies flourish and other societies actually don't. Now, this is an interesting question by Rain, which is, if Allah is good and everything from Allah is good, why do we find bad?
That's a very, very interesting question. He's absolutely right. Because we believe the way we sort of deal with that dilemma, Plato's dilemma or Euthyphro's dilemma, is by saying, look, Allah is good by his very being, and therefore whatever Allah commands is good.
Yeah.
But why do we find therefore bad? Now, I think we have to take this into consideration in a way where, what do we mean by bad? Like, we may see something in the present and say this is bad, right?
Yeah.
But life isn't a picture. Like, it's not a still, right? It's not like here is an image, okay, and this image is red. Life is fluid. We live through time, right? So something may happen right now in this moment, and in this moment we may say bad, right?
Yeah.
But how do we know that that event that's taken place doesn't have greater good for us? And if it
Yeah.
didn't happen, we wouldn't achieve that greater good. And that's
Yeah.
how life unfolds. And that's what Allah tells us in the story of Musa and Khidr in the Quran. That's exactly what we find. And it's a beautiful lesson for us because, you know, Khidr, this individual that we know as Khidr, does certain things which Musa alayhi salam doesn't understand at the time, in that moment, that present. And that's why he sort of reacts in a very, according to his law, what he sees is bad, right? So making a hole in the boat of these poor fishermen is bad in that moment. Of course it is, from the amount of knowledge that he has of that given situation, it is bad. But then when he explains the situation to him at the end, that if he hadn't made the hole, you know, the king, that rich king at the time, would have seized the boat. Therefore, this poor fisherman would have died out of probably starvation, because his only means of livelihood would have been taken away from him. So making the hole meant that the king wouldn't seize the boat, and therefore all he had to do was patch up that hole. And if anything, if all the other boats were taken in that area and his boat was the only one that remained, after patching the boat, he will be in big business. So there will be a greater good that comes from this, subhanAllah, right? So we need to keep that in mind. Life isn't a still; it's moving. We're living through life. You know, we're going from point A to point Z, every single one of our lives, however long that is. And there'll be things that happen in the moment. It may seem bad. In the moment, it may seem evil. In the moment, we may not understand why it's happening, and that happens. And this is where our iman comes in as well, bro. Our faith in Allah. That when something like this happens that you don't understand, we don't as Muslims just jump. And this is another beautiful thing about Islam, bro. That without Islam, you will jump, and there's nothing you can do, because you know, you don't have a concept of a good in the future or something greater that's going to come from this. You will jump, absolutely, and you'll go crazy. Why has this happened? You know, why does this happen? But Allah, in Islam, we're told, okay, something may happen, you may not understand it, but keep your trust in Allah. Eventually there's greater good in this. You know, you may understand the wisdom, you may not understand the wisdom, but you put your trust in Allah, the one that wants best for you. And inevitably there is going to be a greater good in this for you. And you put your trust in Allah, you remain patient, and that's worshipping Allah, man, in that moment. That's what we have to do.
Yeah, good. And I like that. You know, we're giving people enough reason to get other people that they interact with to doubt this idea that we don't need God to be good. We can be good without God. And
yeah, let me ask you. Can I ask you something quickly, bro?
Sure.
Because look, we're even like, from what we've discussed so far, we're assuming you can even understand what good is without God, right? So maybe touch upon that, bro. What can you even make sense of good and bad without God? What does that even mean?
Yeah, you see, this is a very interesting question, and this is something which a lot of people don't realize, that in a secular world, when we say a secular world, it doesn't mean they're totally secular, but you know, in a secular country, especially Western countries, those countries, they have very, very good morals, very good ethics, very good values, which still exist. And people, they latch on to those values. And when they are telling each other that you shouldn't do this, they point out to certain values. The interesting thing is that those values are actually a remnant of Christianity, right? Those are not a product of atheism. They're not a product of secularism. So if you look at, say, the UK has very good values, which you can actually trace back to Christianity. You can trace back to the history of Christianity on the island. So, you know, when people in Europe and people in Britain moved away from God and they moved away from Christianity, they still held on to those values, and they still held on to the idea that some things are good and some things are bad. Now, they held on to this idea like it's true, like it's actually meaningful, like it's objective. But the problem is, objective in this sense, 1 + 1 is 2, or the earth is a particular shape, that's objective. So all these things are objective. But if there is no God, if there is no standard outside of human beings that we can all point to, then morality is subjective, right? Morality is purely subjective. And it kind of reminds me of, I think the best way to explain it is in the film The Joker, the recent film, Alfred, he basically sits on the TV show with Robert De Niro in the end, And he basically explains nihilism. Nihilism means nihil meaning zero, nil, nothing. Ism, worldview, everything's meaningless. That's what nihilism means. He basically says, look, well, we decide what's right and wrong. We decide what's funny or not, right? So it's all subjective. It's all meaningless. There's no basis behind this. So if atheism is a view that somebody holds on to, then by necessity, they have to be a moral nihilist, right? A moral nihilist. Now, before I explain moral nihilism and its implications, just for the new people who've just joined us, please explain what is moral nihilism.
So moral nihilism basically, well, I thought you were going to explain it. Do you want me to explain it?
I can explain. I just thought, you know.
So my just a simple put in simple words, what we're saying is that nihilism, obviously, like you explained, means that it's meaningless, right? Just meaninglessness, right?
Yeah.
So when you refer to moral nihilism, we're being a bit more specific, just like what we may say existential nihilism. But moral nihilism is that when it comes to morals, right and wrong, good and bad, it's essentially meaningless, right? There is no objective reality to these things. It's just all subjective views and wishful thinking in a way, if you like.
Yep, definitely. So Muhammad Ali has asked a question here. How do you counter an atheist when they say their purpose is to leave the world a better place than they found it? If moral nihilism is true.
My biggest thing, and I mentioned this even yesterday's live stream, my biggest thing is, what's amazing, bro, to when you witness an atheist, right? Something that's one thing that almost Allah is showing us through people that ascribe to atheism is, on one hand, they would say, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in a creator. I don't believe in God, right? Yeah. But on the other hand, they are championing humanism. They are championing moral rights. They're talking about right and wrong, good and bad. You know, they're talking about higher virtues, like I want to leave the world a better place, like the brothers asked. You know, all of these things. Now, what we're seeing is, on one hand, is the expression of the human nature, the fitra of the human being, that soul, that self, which aspires to do, you know, good things, aspires to attain higher goals and purpose, and expresses itself in this way. But on the other hand, this very human being is holding on to a worldview such as atheism or naturalism, which is stripping them from being able to account of those things that they feel and know to be true. So we're seeing this contradiction, right? Richard Dawkins, I saw a clip of him yesterday, 2 days ago, a recent clip where he's asked by the host of the podcast, you know, what is the meaning of life? Now, the way he responds, bro, is very interesting. And again, it displays this type of, this contradiction at play. He says, well, from a biological perspective, the meaning to life, or the purpose of life, is to pass on our DNA, to propagate our genes. But I don't feel that. I don't feel that's my purpose. We give ourselves purpose. We have higher purposes, such as we want to write a book, do X, Y, and Z. And then he even goes on to say that you know, we don't, this higher goal or this purpose isn't really tied in with our biological purpose or drive. And I was thinking, well, how does that make sense now, right? Why would you, instead of focusing on what your biology is dictating for you to do and the reason for your existence is, you end up focusing on things that you're making up as you're going along? Right? What's going on there? Again, you're seeing this display, and this is beautiful for someone that thinks and reasons to a view. You're seeing an atheist, his worldview denies him of the things his nature is screaming out, right? And you see this contradiction over and over again, just being displayed. You know, championing human rights, championing animal rights. You know, we saw this with Cosmic Skeptic as well. You had a recent discussion with him. You just see it just blatantly right in front of you. Some people are good at sort of bridging that gap rhetorically, but others, they're just lost for words, to be honest, when it comes to this.
I mean, look, when push comes to shove, and the atheist is cornered, they have to basically admit that morality is purely subjective, right? That it has no basis, that moral nihilism is actually true. And moral nihilism being true, it directly impacts the meaning of life, because any meaning that you say, okay, I am going to write a book to make the world a better place. Well, what is better? Nothing is better than another state. Everything is equal, right? Everything is just as meaningless. So it's just as meaningless to spend your life writing books and educating people about science as it is meaningless for somebody to go around and basically decide to knock on people's doors and run away when they open the door and do that for the rest of their life. Right? They're like a constant prankster. I mean, there's no literal difference between them. Okay, Rahima Ben Malik asks this question, or it's a comment. Being good without God can have limits because we all have different perspectives and vices too. So with atheism, the values keep changing. What do you think of that?
Yeah, she's essentially saying it's all, like you said, it's all subjective. What may mean being good to one atheist will be different from what it means to another. You know,
Yeah.
and at the end of the day, I mean, if you take a hypothetical example, say you have one atheist and atheist number one and atheist number two, one wants to, you know, leave the world a better place, the other wants to leave the world a worse off place, right? And if they were to sit down and discuss this, I mean, at the end of the day, what they're going to come to is, well, there's literally no difference between the two views. One thinks this is good, the other thinks this is good.
Yeah.
What's the higher anchor now, or something that's going to determine that one is correct over the other? There's nothing. It's just their subjective opinions.
Yeah.
Anything goes, you know, literally anything goes. You can make anything your goal, and you can tell yourself that this is true. But I mean, it doesn't take much thinking to realize you're just lying to yourself. You're making it up as you go along.
Yeah.
You know, you're just telling yourself a story.
Yeah. And you know, I think this is very important to understand, because a lot of young people, they think about good. They think about morality. They think about these issues more than sometimes. That was a fly. It just came onto my webcam. It's actually a fly. It's getting hot here. Obviously, the summer's coming.
That was one big fly.
Yeah, man. It just completely took over. I actually forgot what I was saying because it just took over the screen. What was I saying before the fly?
You were saying something about the point about it all being just subjective, different views.
Yeah, basically. Look, God is a necessary being. Is a being that we have to accept in our lives if we want to make sense of objective good. And the thing about objective good is good regardless of what you think. Regardless of what you think. Now, the philosopher MMA, he asks me a question. Can you discuss what's cosmic skeptic's view on the topic? And can you justify how his worldview was wrong? Now, look, it's a very simple point. He understands that, firstly, there's a big gap for the atheist in terms of morality. So he's trying to fill that gap. He's not happy with the existing models. So the way he tries to fill it is this. Firstly, all human beings, we desire pleasure. We desire pleasure. And anything that you throw at him, whether you say, you know, there's people who love pain, there's people who are selfless, he'll always re-engineer that, and he'll say, well, ultimately it's about your pleasure. Ultimately you want a reputation. Ultimately it's about your pleasure. So everybody desires pleasure. Now, if everybody desires pleasure and our goal collectively is to maximize pleasure, right? Then a human being maximizing their own pleasure by hurting another human being, they're basically being inconsistent. They're being inconsistent because they wouldn't want that to happen to them. So it's a very simple point. You can it's an objective truth that everybody desires the maximization of their pleasure. That's objectively true. That's an objective truth, right? Which everybody, according to him, necessarily holds. And the analogy he gives is everybody subjectively likes the color blue. And therefore, it's an objective truth that when it comes to the question of what shall we color the town, it should be the color blue that is objectively true. So that's where he, from subjectivity, gets objectivity. Now, I'm not going to challenge, and we can challenge, but I'm not going to challenge this idea that everybody desires the maximization of their own pleasure, right? That's obviously questionable. But anyway, let's just carry on with the argument. Then, if somebody comes along and says, I want to paint the town yellow, what Alex would say to them is, I can show you that you are objectively wrong because I know you love the color blue. You love the maximization of pleasure. Blue is the color that you actually fundamentally desire. So it's not all subjective. The problem with this view is there's a hidden assumption, and the hidden assumption is the person you're talking to values consistency. They value, if you point out to them you are objectively wrong by wanting to paint the town yellow, by wanting to do this evil action, the person can turn around to you and say, meh. Like, they could be totally indifferent. They could be like, well, I don't really care. Yeah. So there's a hidden assumption, and the hidden assumption is that the person values consistency. They value being rationally consistent, being intellectually honest, intellectually coherent. They don't. Not everybody values that. That's just a thing, right? A lot of people value that, right? But that doesn't mean everybody values that. Some people are going to be like, yeah, I don't care if I'm being inconsistent. I don't want my children to do drugs, but I will sell drugs to other people. Why? Somebody will say you're being inconsistent. You're objectively wrong because you don't want that to happen to your children, but you're going to make it happen to other people. And I can be like, if I value consistency, I'll stop. If I don't value consistency, I'll be like, man, I don't really care.
Yeah.
The second point is he cannot apply it. The thing about objective morality, objective truth is, the truth of objective morality is you can apply it. Whether a person likes it or not, you can say it is wrong to murder, it is wrong to cheat, it's wrong, and you will apply it. His view, you can't even apply it. You just have to try and reason with people and assume that they value consistency. So that's basically it. I mean, it's not complicated, his view. I mean, you can flower it up with all this different language and different premises and different, examples, but that's basically his view.
Yeah. Also, bro, what you said, if I heard you correctly, what you said was that you wouldn't do something that would hurt someone else because you wouldn't want to be hurt yourself by someone doing that to you.
Yeah.
But then again, that's another principle that you're putting into place then. And
Yeah.
they have to value, that person has to value that principle, which is that person, although they may desire to do X, but if X hurts someone and they know that, then they shouldn't do it because they don't want no one to do that to them. But if you don't do it, then you're not really putting your desires or your wants first anymore. So it has other problems that way as well, right?
You can put it that way as well. And the thing about these types of views is that if you go past all the smoke and mirrors, fundamentally it's subjective. Fundamentally.
Yeah.
But no atheist in a debate, in a dialogue, wants to say morality is subjective, because that's like the ultimate. It's almost like just admitting defeat. It's just like doing an own goal. So when it comes to a simple question like, is this action objectively wrong? You have to understand, they can't just say yes categorically. They have to say, yes, it's objectively wrong if we all assume this, and then they'll explain their view X, Y, Z, right? And that's basically, I mean, the debate went on for like 2 hours or whatever, but the basic issue was, it's not objective, right? Forget your way of covering it and making it look nice. It's not objective. And this is extremely important to understand, because fundamentally the view that we are trying to push out in the dawah, because fundamentally we don't want people to go out there and just learn abstract philosophical ideas. This is about the dawah. This is about going out, sharing the message. And right now, while we're under lockdown, it's a perfect opportunity to share Islam. We've got this campaign called A Viral Awakening, and every person in their capacity, they can basically share Islam, right? The thing is, it's very important for us to explain to people, without God, there is really no such thing as good.
Bro, it's about keeping it simple. That's the key point.
Yeah.
Like, some people are very good at using rhetoric, using sophistry, complicating things, like you said, flowering it up. So people have to get stuck in that web of flowers without really understanding that fundamental point, which is what the simple point is, that as human beings, we know that there are certain things just naturally that are good and bad, right? And we will call good good and call bad bad. But what we're saying is that if you remove God, then you can't make sense of good and bad anymore, right? There is no real good or bad. So the fact that, and I would say another way of looking at it is the fact that there is objective good and objective evil, that proves God exists. That's what we're saying. Because without God, you can't justify these things, right? So that's the simple point. We know there's good, therefore God must exist. And it's a simple argument that because we can see good, we appreciate good, we can call good good, and when we see bad, we say it's bad, and we know it's bad, objectively bad inside. That's enough reason to know that there is a creator. And that's a very powerful argument to make for the existence of a creator.
Yeah. Definitely. And I want to answer the question of Salah Ahmed, and you can add something if you want to after this. Is objective morality known through God's revelation, or is it our fitrah? The thing is, there's a very simple answer to this. It's both, right? So even if you've never heard of Islam or something else, you know objectively, deep down, that it's wrong to worship anyone except Allah. You know it's wrong to take the rights of orphan, or to be in a position of authority and misuse that. There's so many things which are just cross-cultural, universal, we all understand them. And when you push a human being like, okay, you believe in this, where did it come from? People can't articulate it. People can't articulate it, but it's there. Everybody has it. Yeah. Now, revelation is an additional thing which tells you certain things that you didn't know. So, for example, objectively, we know it's good to worship God and it's bad to do other than Allah's worship and to steal and rob. And so revelation comes and says, well, this is how you worship God. This is how you distribute to orphans. I mean, the Quran is quite interesting. The Quran assumes, if you go through it, it assumes people have a recognition of good. It doesn't say giving to orphans is, objectively good. It doesn't go through. It assumes people know. People know. And the thing is, even the pagan Arabs, when the Prophet, peace be upon him, came with this message and started reforming the society, they understood what he's trying to do. They had a concept, like, for example, with prostitution. They used to have that in Makkah, and that wasn't an issue before Islam. However, when they were rebuilding the Kaaba, they were like, oh, no money from prostitution is going to be used to build the Kaaba. Why? Because they had a recognition of good. So it's both. It's fitrah and it's objective. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of in Surah Shams, Allah says, for example, Allah says, after He says that He shaped the soul, He shaped and proportioned the soul, Allah says, فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا, that He inspired it of its good and its evil. So that good and evil, there's an element of that which is embedded within the soul itself, the nature itself. And that's why when the human being reads the Quran, like you said, Allah doesn't spell it out, giving charity is good for X, Y, and Z reason. It says give charity, assuming that the soul would recognize the goodness of that action itself. A sound heart would recognize the goodness of the action itself. So it's both. It's a combination of both.
Yeah, definitely. There's a comment here by Exer. Subjective morality can never be correct. That in of itself destroys the very foundation of atheism. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think it's just summarizing the points that we're speaking about in another nice way as well, which is we know, as soon as you say this action is bad, you're internally, innately recognizing that is an objective truth. Although, like you said, you don't articulate, or you may not be able to articulate it. Because if you truly believed that your view that this action that's happening is bad is just subjective, if you really believe that, then what's the point of even saying it's bad? Or opening your mouth and expressing your feelings towards it. We only say something is bad when we genuinely feel like it actually is bad. So what I'm saying is, if you remove all the technical jargon and all the philosophical discussion and just bring it down to the bare bones as human beings, when we see bad, we know it's bad, right? We don't know that it's just a subjective wishful idea that I have, and it's not really true. It's not really bad. I'm just thinking it's bad. We don't feel like that. We feel it's bad. And that knowing can't be accounted for in atheism. There's no account for it. And that should be a sign enough. And that's why we say that your nature should be a sign for you that this worldview is wrong and you should look elsewhere. You should maybe look for other alternatives. Maybe you won't go to Islam straight away, but you need to broaden your horizon and get out of this pit of atheism and naturalism, because it will stump you from every direction. It won't let you go anywhere.
Yeah, and another way of thinking about it is, so a lot of atheists, they say, we believe in science. And you ask them, well, why do you believe in science? Because science gives you truth. You can ask them, well, why do you follow truth? Well, they'll say, of course. Why not? I mean, what kind of question is that? Of course we follow truth. No, why do you value truth over falsehood? They say, well, of course, it's obvious, truth is good. Ah, that's a moral thing. Following the
Yeah.
truth is a moral thing. It's not actually it's not intrinsic that there's something. If I point out to you, Imran, it's true that you eating a deep fried samosa from Southall, which has chili inside it, a chili samosa every single day, that's true, it's gonna kill you eventually, yeah? That's not going to change your behavior necessarily unless you value truth and you value
Mhm.
your health. You have to value other things, and those are moral claims fundamentally. So truth itself is undermined if atheism is true.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, an atheist
Is that another
asked,
question?
yeah, an atheist asked why it's necessary that something propagated by God is objectively true, and how do we know basically it's from God that this thing is objectively true?
Well, it's true and it's good because it comes from the all-knowing being, the creator
No,
of
no,
everything.
the question is different. Like, for example, if we say
Yeah.
this is from God, yeah,
Mm.
how do we as Muslims believe that that is from God? What's our justification?
So our fundamental source is the Quran,
Yeah,
and we believe the Quran is the final revelation from God. And therefore, if once we get to the point where we understand the Quran is from God, then whatever the Quran says is by necessity true, because
yeah,
it comes from the all-knowing being. So the
yeah,
question really is, okay, how do we now know the Quran is the final revelation from God? That's the real
yeah,
question. Because once you answer this, bro, anything the Quran says, then you should, the most rational thing to do is to hear and to obey, to submit, even if you don't understand the full wisdom behind things or the rationale behind things, right?
yeah,
Because the most rational thing to do is submit and to obey once you have rationally come to the conclusion that and intuitively come to the conclusion that this book is the final revelation from God. So I think that in itself is another question, maybe which we can maybe touch upon in this live stream, and maybe do another live stream on this later probably as well on Revelation itself.
yeah.
But what proofs would you use, bro, for the Quran being a miracle
Yeah.
from God, or,
So
or the miracle of the Quran?
just before I get into that, there's a question by a non-Muslim, which is Lukacha. Hi, hope you are well. I have just one question. I would really appreciate an answer on this. I would like to study Islam, but I don't know where to start. Which translation of the Quran is the easiest? So if you go to, and firstly, thank you so much for tuning in. We love the fact that you've tuned in and asked this question. If you go to Quran.com, and you will see a whole bunch of translations. And if you click on Mustafa Khatab, Dr. Mustafa Khatab, then you will basically, that is the easiest translation that's available. On top of that, if you go to onereason.org, which I am also actually putting into the description, if you go to onereason.org, you will actually find that there are a number of articles on Islam, and you can also download a short introduction to the Quran, a short journey through the Quran, which is a really good introduction for non-Muslims. And any questions you actually have, you can actually, on the One Reason website, you can send us a message and we will get back to you. One Reason is part of the IERA organization, and that is a resource that we've made specifically for non-Muslims to learn about Islam.
Mhm.
Okay.
Also, bro,
Hopefully that,
also
yep,
just to add to that, because with this campaign, a viral awakening, we have a live chat service as well. So if they want to talk to someone live,
very good.
there's going to be the option on the bottom of the screen, which there'll be a little pop-up with a message symbol. If you click on that, you'll be able to speak to someone live and ask them questions about Islam, inshallah. God
Yeah.
willing.
Yep. Let me look through some other questions. There's a lot of questions. Okay, there's a very good question from a friend from Peshawar, and I can answer this question because he's on my WhatsApp. So I want you to answer this question, Imran. Atheists say we value things because it's in our nature. There is no need of an external agent to implement or explain it to us. How do we answer it? It's just part of our nature.
Okay, so I would probably answer in a few parts. First part is, well, if you recognize your nature that is morally good and values truth and values goodness, then well, how do you account for this nature without God,
Yeah.
right? Where did this nature come from? I mean, if you deny God and you sort of ascribe to sort of the Darwinian paradigm, then your nature as well as everything else about you evolved through this process of evolution. And therefore, your nature, including everything else about you, should be geared towards survival and reproduction, and not towards truth, or valuing truth, or valuing goodness. What would be good would be whatever is in line with your survival. So good will take on a whole new form. Goodness will be a whole new kettle of fish. And if that was the case, then a lot of things which we as human beings know to be good will be bad. And what we know to be bad would be good. So that would be a huge problem from that perspective. So again, you will end up with a problem. How do you account for this nature, which without God, that values goodness and values truth? So that's the fundamental issue, is to account for that nature. And secondly, I would probably just press that point. Is okay. That's good. You recognize you have a nature. That nature you recognize inclines towards good, and inclines towards truth, and values these things. Well, how do you make sense of this nature? And I would argue that the evolutionary Darwinistic account, or Darwinian account, doesn't adequately account for this nature as we understand it. It gives shape to a totally different type of nature, if anything.
Yep, absolutely. Now, Johnny Basil, he's part of our distribution team, and for Lukacha, who asked the question before, he said that he can actually send her out a free copy of the Clear Quran. Thank you very much for joining us and giving us that idea. So you can also get that done, and even during this lockdown, you can actually have a free copy of the
I would
Quran.
say any non-Muslims that watch this, or any non-Muslims that are interested in getting a free copy, maybe contact Johnny Basil, and he'll be able to give you guys, or send you guys, a free copy of the Quran, a Clear Quran. But that's by Dr. Mustafa Khattab, which is one of the best translations, mashallah, and the simplest and easiest translations to understand, to start with as well.
Absolutely. Now we're coming to a point where there are a lot of questions, there are a lot of comments. I would, however, say that if you've asked a question which I haven't actually answered yet, just type it out again. Because there's so many comments, it's hard to actually scroll all the way up and then try and get to them. Okay, there's one about, okay. Atheism is not a belief, it is a lack of belief. Okay? So this is something that we hear quite often. I want to hear your thoughts on this, Imran, before I give my 2 cents.
So here's my take on it. You can call it a worldview, you can call it a philosophy, you can call it an ideology, you can call it a lack of belief, whatever you want to call it, no problem, right? The reality is, as soon as you deny God and say there is no creator, call it a lack of belief, it has implications. You can't escape those implications, right? Those implications stand, whatever you call it, a positive philosophy, or call it just a lack of a belief, it has implications, right? What we're simply doing is we're highlighting those implications. Those implications, at least from what we're discussing today, are moral implications, that you can't provide an account for objective moral values and truths. It has existential implications, that there is no meaning to life in the absence of God. So that's my take on it. It's fine. You can call it a lack of belief. You can call it a positive worldview. You can call it a philosophy. Whatever you want to call it, the implications still remain. They don't go anywhere by changing the label.
Yeah. And also, it's not just that it's related to good and evil. It's also related to life being absurd. So recently, Imran debated, what's his name? Richards? John Richards, and that debate is available on the IRA channel, and you can actually see, regardless of how much emotivism, right? Emotivism, where they express emotion, but there's no objective basis to it. Regardless of how much emotive arguments they actually use, life is actually absurd. And also, Imran is on epistemics, covering these types of issues about the implications of not having a belief in God in more detail, and make sure you check out that channel for more content. Now, somebody asked a question, this. Okay. Okay. It might be a bit of a repetition, but it'll help you answer the question from maybe a different perspective that the viewers haven't heard. It's always good to have a bit of repetition as well, though. So Muhammad Sanju is saying, I gave dawah to a Buddhist friend of mine and he kept saying, it doesn't matter whether God exists or not, as long as you live a good life. How do I answer him from an Islamic perspective?
So the first thing is, again, this person is recognizing there is something we call a good life, right? That there is goodness, and he's obviously trying to practice this goodness. And as far as I understand it, the mainstream Buddhist view is that there is no creator, there is no God, but there are, it encourages the practice of spirituality and things like this, and encourages you to sort of adhere to and implement certain virtues in your life and be a virtuous person, etc. The point, if again, boils down to the thing, well, what is good without God? How do we understand that goodness? What is goodness? And even if you do have an understanding of it and you say it's from my nature, I recognize this is good and I recognize this is what we should do. How do you account for that nature? How do you know that that is actually what good is? You can't make sense of these things without an anchor, without God. It's just like that would be saying, I want to have my cake and eat it too, as we have that idiom, right? You want to be good, feel good, but you don't want to recognize and acknowledge the one that allows you to do that, one that gave you that ability and those traits. And I think that's the height of ingratitude, bro, is that you recognize you have been given a gift, which is to understand goodness and to be good and to live a good life, but you don't thank the one that gave it to you. And this is why Islam, in Islam, an integral part of worship is gratitude, is to recognize the one that's given you all the blessings that you have. That is Allah, and to thank him for it, to give thanks and praise. That's the most intelligent thing to do. That's the most human thing to do. That's the greatest good, if you think about it in a way. What does it mean to be good, bro? If you don't have the goodness to thank the one that gave you the ability to be good in the first place. How can we say we're being good? If I was to give you a worldly analogy, bro, and no analogy is befitting of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but just to think about it, imagine your parents raise you and teach you good values and morals and teach you how to be good and take care of others. Yeah. Now you grow up and you go out into the world and you help your neighbors and you take care of the old lady down the road and you visit the sick and you do X, Y, and Z and you're a good person. But your parents, you treat them like rubbish.
Yep.
Yeah. You treat your parents like rubbish. You don't care for them. You just swear at them. You abuse them. Are you really a good person? Right? You're doing these acts of goodness, but you're not thanking. You're treating the ones that taught you what good is in such a nasty and bad way. Are you really good when you can't even acknowledge the ones that gave you the ability to be good? And inevitably, at the end of the day, Allah is the one that gives us our parents. Allah is the one that has created this goodness and taught us what goodness is and instilled an element of that goodness within us. If you can't thank him, if you can't be grateful to him, are you really good at the end of the day? That's another perspective on it as well, I guess.
No, definitely. And I like the fact that you explained good is not just the way that even atheists talk about good, which is, feed the elderly, take care of the poor, take care of nature. Good fundamentally also includes the ultimate good, which is to worship God. And to disbelieve in God is objectively bad. That is part and parcel of what it means to be good. So this whole idea of I'm good without God in and of itself doesn't make any sense, for the simple reason that if you're not good to God, but say you're good to, I don't know, orphans and stuff, you're only partially good. You're not. Fundamentally, there's such a great being which created you, which nourishes you, which gave you everything that you have. And it's just part of human nature that we want to thank people that give us stuff. And what about the creator who's giving you all these things? So definitely it's very important to understand this point.
Yeah, I would go further. I would say that it's just if you can't thank the one that gave you this goodness and the ability to be good, you're not good. There's just a facade of goodness. You're doing actions which you recognize innately to be good, but you're doing them just to get a kick, just for selfish reasons. It's at the end of the day, it's for selfish reasons, just to feel good, right?
Yeah.
Because if you can't thank the one that gave you the ability, are you really good? You know, you're not doing the fundamentals right, but you're building a 6-story building, but your ground floor is in disarray. You know, your house is on fire and you're trying to go out there and put the water out for your neighbors down the road. It doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? You know, what does that goodness mean when you can't thank the one that made you good?
Yeah, sure. Just want to answer a quick question here. Somebody's asking, one of my friends is trying to point out mistakes in the Quran, and that friend is an atheist, how to respond to them? Well, firstly, we can show them that there are no mistakes in the Quran, or we can do something which is even more easier and funnier, which is we can say to them, hypothetically, yeah, okay, fine, the Quran's full of mistakes, the Quran's full of falsehoods, hypothetically. Why is it wrong for me to still follow it? They'll say it's wrong. I'll say, why? You're an atheist. Wrong and right doesn't exist. Truth doesn't matter. You see, the thing about moral nihilism, the idea that morality does not exist for atheism, means you cannot even value truth. So even all of their arguments, like, you have no rational justification for believing in God. There's no God. And even if we accept that for the sake of argument and say, for the sake of argument, I'm going to accept there's no God. For the sake of argument, I'm going to accept there's no good reason to believe in God. But I'll believe in God anyway. They'll be like, well, why are you doing that? That's wrong. I'll be like, well, wrong and right and good and bad and evil, these are all subjective and they don't exist. I mean, look, the thing is that the atheist pretends as if they're coming at us with a really powerful argument. But even if that argument was unanswered, we can simply say to them, well, why does truth matter anyway under your worldview? And they literally don't have an answer. I mean, one of the students who attended my Dawah training here in Pakistan, not that I told him anything amazing, it's just, you know, you learn and you use a few arguments. I explained moral nihilism and how morality is does not exist. And there was this atheist that he was debating with, and the atheist is talking about, you know, human rights, morality, ethics, truth, science, you know, atheist activism. And my student asked him, well, if you're a moral nihilist, why are you doing atheist activism? It's completely meaningless. It has no meaning. How can you reconcile believing in nothing and believing in atheist activism? And the guy literally, he just changed the topic and just got out of the debate. Because he just, and I was surprised at how quickly he bailed out of that debate, because it makes sense actually. The safest way of protecting your reputation, if you're in a debate and you're an atheist and somebody asks you that question, is to pretend you're busy and walk away, because there's literally zero solutions. If you're a moral nihilist, there's no difference between a Nazi, between an atheist activist, between a Muslim activist, between a Jewish activist, between anybody. Everything is meaningless and everything is pointless and everything has no value. Yeah. So this question asked by Carrie Snowdrift, and I'll give this to you, Imran, on the basis of what we just discussed about moral nihilism. If we logically prove God works, good works is beneficial for human species, then what's the need for God? So let me repeat that. If we can logically prove good things is beneficial for human beings, then why do we need God?
Yeah, again, I would say, look, it's a very it's a very selfish way of looking at it, and we have just reconstructed the meaning of good here. So if we're just seeing some good as an entity which brings benefit to the human creature, well, then it's not really about good and bad in the actual sense as we understand good and bad, which are these sort of these virtuous understanding of the world, and goodness is, we understand goodness and bad things in a certain way, right? Which is, this is actually good and this is bad. But what's been said here is, it's just redefined what good is. It's just this thing, this abstract thing which we do to make ourselves feel good. And according to this type of standard, depending on the individual, a rapist may think it's good to do his business and do these evil acts, and well, it will be good according to this standard, whatever brings benefit to the human species, right? Goodness makes them feel good. So it's just redefining what we're talking about. It's just taken goodness, removed its true meaning, given it a totally different character and meaning, and put back into the point. That's what seems to be happening.
No, absolutely. And we've just run out of time because we want to keep this 1 hour. And also for you guys, very good news, which is that in Ramadan, which is literally just around the corner. I mean, how many days is it away? I think it's less than a week now,
Yeah, less than a
inshallah.
week.
So this beautiful month in which we are closer to Allah in a time of the Quran, in a time of Afkar, in a time that we don't want to be distracted by Netflix, we don't want to be distracted by constant scrolling through our screens, pointless, changing from one topic to another. We are going to be live every single day at 6 p.m. UK time, which is 10 o'clock, well, my time, but it's 6 o'clock British Standard Time. And we are going to be going through the entire Go-Rap. We're going to be going through why Dawah is important, God's existence, oneness, revelation, prophethood, and then into the different contentions that people make about Islam and how we can address those deep issues. And all of this is going to be live Dawah training for all of you, and it's going to be very much interactive like we have here. And it is something that I want you guys all to watch out for. So 30 days of Ramadan, whether it's going to be 29, 30 days, we don't know, but we're going to be live every single day. So make sure you tune in and share this news with everybody so that they also get the message. Now, just to end upon Imran, so today's live stream was about no God, no good, right? Now, in relation to the online dawah that we are giving to atheists, we're speaking to them, we're on Twitter, we're on Discord or Twitch or whatever social media platform, right? If we want to summarize this argument in 20 seconds, right? In 20 seconds, how would we say that because you don't believe in God and you need to believe in God to basically believe in good? How would we summarize it?
So here's how I would do it. Keep it very simple firstly, right? Assume that everyone's going to understand simple things. Ask them a simple question. As a human being, do you recognize good and bad, right? Do you recognize that there is things that are good and there are things that are bad? Every sane human being will say, yes, I recognize there are things that are good and there are things that are bad, right? That's actually what drives us as human beings, right? To do good. We always look to do good and avoid doing bad, generally speaking. If we understand this, just ask him a simple question. How do you make sense of good and bad without God? Asking questions is very powerful. Let them think about this. And any honest, sincere, rational person, when they stop and think about this question, they would realize that, yeah, I understand good and bad, but without God, I can't make sense of this. And that should be enough of a sign for someone like that to reconsider the existence of God. And at that point, you can take them on the journey then to talk about God's existence, oneness, revelation, prophethood, talk about the Quran, talk about Islam, and how that provides answers. That's how I would do it in a simple way, basically.
Yeah, no, definitely. And especially when you said it answers questions, because fundamentally, if we don't know why we are here, if we don't know why we exist, where we're going in our very short lives, I mean, I literally think, I mean, this fly that's been flying around me, I mean, how long is it going to be alive? A couple of days or perhaps a week? There's some insects, some particular type of organisms which they literally live for 24 hours. Like they're born, they fly around and they die within 24 hours. Now, when we look at that, we're like, oh, how short of a life is that? But seriously, guys, when we think about it, our lives are exactly the same. We're here for like 50, 60, 70 years, if we get to that. I mean, a lot of us may not even get to that, right? And you compare that with eternity, it's like a drop in the ocean. It's like we're headed towards eternity. We're headed towards this vortex, this endless darkness, right? And we need to start thinking like, what's the purpose of our lives? Why do we exist? So without God, not only can you not really justify good actions, you can't really have a good life because you're continuously thinking about, why do I exist? What's the point of life? And you're continuously, even if you try and distract yourself, you have these burning questions about meaning, value, purpose, and society. So thank you very much for joining us, Imran Hussein, and we are going to be live, inshallah, in Ramadan, myself and Imran, myself and Saladin Patel, myself and Muhammad Hijab, and all the brothers from our era, teaching you guys how you can convey the beautiful message of Islam online in the beautiful month of Ramadan. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.